Closing arguments in the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. How would the prosecution close out their case to the jury? Money, religion, and a love affair. Allegations hammered home to the 12 people who will decide if Vallow Daybell is guilty of conspiring in her fourth husband's murder. The saga began in Arizona and will end here soon. The jury now has the case against LVD, but first, what she had to say after not presenting any evidence in trial. I'm Justin Lum, and we are on the record. I'm Fox 10 investigator Justin Lum here, joined by Special Projects EP George Obie, and what a day. It's been a blur. It's been a blur of a trial, less than 10 days. Here we are after so much witness testimony, evidence, and then let's just get back to Trina K, who went almost 2 hours for closing arguments. Now, maybe this is normal for any state prosecutor, especially with a case like this. But I can see why the jury said we are going to go home for the night and deliberate tomorrow.
I think it's important to remember these jurors were gone for 4 days, right? Thursday was the last day. I'm understanding at this point, that 4 days is a long time for a jury that may not know the case as well as we do. And so clearly Trina K wanted to reiterate everything that she had brought up in the last 2 weeks. And so that PowerPoint presentation was very important to give them kind of a refresher, but also go into this knowing these are the facts of the case. This is what's been presented to you. And again, proving once again that the state believes that Lori conspired with her brother to kill Alex.
Now, first off, we have finally narrowed down our jurors to 12. 2 men have been excused based on the lottery, so they're alternates, and they've gone through all of these 9 days or so, and they're alternates now, so they're probably like, okay, what do I do now? But they're ready in case anything happens. So 12 jurors now have the case, and a 4-person has been decided on, or that will be finalized tomorrow morning as they get back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. And who knows when we get a decision. But it was like Trina took her huge research paper and then gave them the cliff notes again. Remember this? Remember this? Remember that? Here are clips from these witnesses that were key in this trial. And she just laid out the whole timeline, brought back the texts and emails, brought in the religious aspects. I mean, it was very valuable and worth the nearly 2 hours. But that was a lot to take in once again.
I almost wonder too if there is the assumption that, look, if any juror would have come in this morning and not seen anything the last 2 weeks, that PowerPoint would have gotten them caught up. I mean, like you said, played the snippets from all of the witnesses that the state called to the stand, very kind of to the point. And I think even playing some of the audio, it's one thing in a closing argument to hammer home what was testified in court from your witnesses, but then to have the ability to show it, play it again, play the parts that she felt like were the crux of her case. I had no issue with it. I think our panel this afternoon felt the same way, that she did exactly what they thought she would. And knowing that Lori not only did not put up a defense, but probably wasn't going to put up much of a closing argument either.
She did her job, Trina did, and she reminded the jury. She said, look at Lori's words, actions, and motives. That is what she focused on, and then she would bring you an example of what happened on the day of July 11, 2019. She says that Alex Cox, Lori's brother, came over for a specific reason, for a purpose and a mission on July 10th, 2019, with a gun to be ready so that when Charles came over the next morning to pick up JJ, he would be ready for this mission. And that's what Trina kept on hammering home, as well as this phone, this topic of Charles's phone and how that is a way and a device, an object to keep him inside the home for this alleged setup. Get JJ in the car and ready to go to school, ready to go to Burger King for breakfast, but get Charles to chase her around. That's what Trina's saying. And then get this bat involved. And I think she couldn't lay it out better, even though it was a long closing argument. But I mean, she has to do what she has to do there to show the actions and the motive and the demeanor by Lori.
Yeah, she hammered home a few things today. I was kind of counting a few things that she said. She talked about the 12-minute time, right? The time frame, the 12. She hammered home the term 12 minutes almost a dozen times today. She talked a lot about Nephi,
Yeah,
right?
the
And
Nephi story. For
right.
those that don't know, Nephi is this very important biblical figure in the Book of Mormon. I guess Lori said there's multiple versions of him, but he had to kill this King Laban for being a bad or terrible king, and it was justified. So everything that he did was justified, and she says this story was used for Lori's life.
And if you're again, I was keeping track. 24 times the term Nephi was brought up, mostly by the prosecution, by Trina K. Lori mentioned it a little bit. But again, these are all terms we heard during the trial. But those are all, I think, some of the things, if you're not in the LDS faith, you're not familiar with. So clearly, Trina thought it was important that this was brought up for the sheer purpose of the motive and how maybe, I don't know, I guess if a juror was to make their own conclusion that if, even if you don't follow the LDS faith, there's nothing in there that where Nephi is connected with murdering somebody. So I thought it was interesting that she kind of brought that home a few times. And then she talked obviously about Lori's demeanor. That came up a lot. Nonchalant played part of the interview in her interrogation, or I'm sorry, her interview with police after the shooting. And I felt like there was a time when she was kind of repeating a lot of what we had already heard in those earlier parts of the closing statements, but she felt like they were important enough to kind of hammer home. And then only a few of those things, and I say a very few of those things, was brought up in Lori's closing arguments.
And something everyone had been waiting for, the feet.
Oh, the
Trina
sandals.
says, you notice that when she walked into Walgreens that morning, she had some black slippers or sandals. I don't know what they are exactly, but Lori had said she rushed out after the shooting in bare feet and had to go get flip-flops. And Trina does a good job of reminding them, well, Chandler PD never searched that rental car, alluding to, what she was wearing on the way out after the shooting was there. And then she comes back with new flip-flops on and says that she had to go get those because she was just running out, scared for her life and her kids, and driving off in Charles' rental car with his phone. So I don't think she forgot about that. I think she's been waiting to bring that up.
In case the jury may have missed that, again, it all goes to her point of Lori's demeanor and why what was being shown and said differed than what Lori had been saying up until this point. We obviously talked a lot about the sandals or the slippers or whatever in that. But it is interesting that some of the little things that she brought up that maybe the jury might have missed. I know that Lori even had something to say about the detectives not testing the scene properly or not securing it, not certain things they didn't test.
The bat, the gun,
yeah,
gun residue, things like that. She totally tried to, mock the investigation of Chandler PD.
Yeah, I think it's another aspect of this that might go over or might have gone over the jury's head during this trial. I wonder too. Again, we talked a lot about this. Is we know so much about the case, but you have 12 people now who are, in theory, assumed that they don't know anything about this case. Whether or not what was said today was enough for them to make the decision. I would think the 2 weeks leading up to this, yes, but did Lori do anything to change the jury's minds? And did Trina?
She didn't present anything.
Yeah.
So it was all Trina, and it's almost like the jury is drowning in information over the past 8 to 9 days. Let's listen to Trina K talk about that demeanor.
Finally, think about the demeanor when you're thinking about, again, words, actions, motive, and demeanor. When Lori comes back to the house, she is very, what did we hear that word many times? Nonchalant, calm, no questions about her brother, no questions about her husband, no questions about the house, just laughing about her neighbors. She is in absolute agreement with what has happened. She knows what's happened, and she's calm and good with it because she doesn't need to repent. She is able to determine who should live and die, and she has done that.
So you brought up a good point that the jury needs the reminders. They've seen 19 witnesses, heard from 19 witnesses, exhibit after exhibit, text after text between Lori and Chad, Lori and Alex Cox, Lori and other friends, emails from Charles. It's a lot. So hence, we understand why you bring out the Cliff Notes and go through the PowerPoint presentation. But I think it's interesting that because Lori Vallow Daybell did not intend to present any evidence at all, and then she goes up there and says to the jury that the state has failed to provide any evidence or prove their burden, that she is beyond a reasonable doubt, conspired with Alex Cox, and that this is self-defense. She says that self-defense is not a crime, and she uses this term a lot, this family tragedy term. I mean, we are staying biased, but the jury just doesn't know what they don't know about the series of murderous events that happened. That she's a convicted killer. I get that. We have to look at this as an isolated case. But just the mannerisms and how it's I don't know, it's bizarre.
And we will talk a little bit more about this, but if you are one of the 12 jurors in all of this, you obviously have more questions, and there are certain things that they cannot answer and will not be able to answer if you have come back and say, look, I need to know about this, or I don't recall what this happened here.
You called it the elephants in the room.
Yes, more than
multiple.
one.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tylee and JJ.
Yeah, I mean, Tylee and JJ would be the first.
Yeah.
There were several other. If she's saying this is a family tragedy, and if she's alluding to that, they're trying to turn that into a crime, whatever. We'll hear that in a minute. But then there are other family members that I'm sure they would want to hear from outside of Tylee and JJ. Do they know about Chad? Like, where's, we brought up a lot, or they brought up a lot of names in this case. We've talked a lot about it. There are other family members that are still alive that were around and in this circle at the time. And is the jury going to want to know, where are they at? And again, there are certain things the court cannot answer. The judge alluded to it, that if he can't answer it, he will ask the jurors to refer back to their jury instructions. Then you wonder, is a non-answer or the inability to answer going to affect their decision? Are they going to be left going, well, they can't answer that, but I need that answered before I can decide whether this woman is guilty or innocent? Maybe that's a question we can ask the jury if we ever get to speak to them.
And I definitely think that we will get to speak to at least one and find out what were they thinking during this whole time, and wondering if Tylee Ryan was going to take the stand, because Lori is telling the jury she protected her mom. She just wanted to protect her mom. And she says, we learned through this trial that we cooperated with the police. We were taken in a police van. Alex Cox was never handcuffed. And we did everything they asked us to do. They didn't tell us to remain in the city of Chandler. That it looked like, according to her, and I think some people might actually agree, that in the beginning of this, they were let off the hook and free to go and do what they want to do. And then you think of everything that happened after, with the murders of JJ and Tylee, Tammy Daybell, the shooting at Brandon Boudreaux, and it just makes you think, wow, I know hindsight is 20/20. But that just brings up a point.
And then you have all of these other little intangibles of, when you talk about Lori's demeanor, her demeanor going to Hawaii, on a honeymoon, when the multiple law enforcement agencies are trying to find her children, and she's just like, whatever.
The demeanor never changes, right? No, that's exactly right. Poolside in Kauai, walking to the hotel with Chad Daybell, smiling or just acting like there's nothing wrong. Her demeanor, she has never really changed.
No.
She has been the same. You get, what you see is what you get, besides, the initial meetings with police officers and how she can be charming and smiling, as people have described her, as even, our legal experts have described her. And then you look at the rap sheet and the criminal history in Idaho, and you're like, this is just, this is insane that this happened.
And some of the evidence they brought up, especially early, the stuff from early in 2019, again, these conversations that Lori had with others, even the conversations that Alex was having, like, I think that should resonate as well. Like you said, her demeanor it wasn't like this is out of the blue for her. I thought the prosecution set it up perfectly, with some of that. Would you like to hear from more of those women on those retreats? Sure. But you've clearly established who this individual is, and we're talking about Lori, that her demeanor on July 10th and more so on July 11th of 2019 is exactly who she was. And to go and look at and not just read the text, which I thought were probably one of the more damning things when you think that those texts before the shooting and then after,
learning that she's not getting the life
right,
insurance,
the money. Again, this
Social Security benefits.
yes. If you had to describe Lori as a personality, the jury got plenty. All right. And this is not including the fact that she was representing herself, which I wonder if that would have changed all of this. If she had a proper public defender or just a defense attorney, and whether we would be having a different conversation about not only the case itself that was presented in court, but these closing arguments today. Our panel, I think, said it the best, that she didn't do anything to help her. In fact, she probably made it worse today, just because she didn't have much of a response.
And she didn't really follow the rules.
No, and it's not often you hear objections in closing arguments.
Yeah.
You hear them, but Trina was ready today. She had her objections ready to go
And ready to rebut.
and knew immediately.
And before we talk more about that, let's listen to how Lori finished her closing arguments and basically said the state has failed through all of this.
The state put forth a bunch of evidence in this trial in an effort to make you dislike me, to try to attack my character, so that you would just say guilty no matter what evidence they showed you. But only you get to decide. The state put up witnesses that had zero knowledge of a conspiracy. The state did not show you evidence of an agreement to commit murder. They showed you evidence of a family tragedy, and then they showed you the sad effects of a family torn apart because of that tragedy.
Torn apart by a family tragedy. To hear that and what we know is wild, because we know that she killed her daughter, Tylee.
Mm-hmm.
Just months later, she killed her son, JJ, as well. A 7-year-old with autism who lasted a couple weeks in Idaho, in this new city, in new school that he was at. And so much was changing, and he didn't necessarily understand at all what happened to his dad, Charles Vallow. And Trina also mentions that JJ was a 7-year-old in a house where his uncle comes in with a gun in this case, and Lori's not worried about that. But then Lori, in her cross-exam and in her arguments, is saying that, Charles was putting them in danger. And so it's like this hypocritical thing. I don't think the jury's dumb.
No,
And
I don't think they're dumb. And Trina brought it up, I think, late in her closing arguments today. And then Lori kind of alluded to it, that, we heard the insurance call again in closing arguments, right? We heard Trina talk about how Lori's demeanor, the jury needs to understand and pay more attention to Lori's demeanor outside the home. This is a mother who comes back to the scene, and the father of her child has been shot. She learns that he is now dead, and yet there is more concern, as Lori put it, that the father of her child left her child nothing.
Mhm.
Right? When it came to life, there was nothing left. She was more concerned about that than she was that her child's father had been shot and killed.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the jury picked up on that, but Trina hammered that demeanor part home several times today. And then when I heard Lori bring it up in her closing, the insurance stuff, it was, I was upset because JJ wasn't going to have it. He didn't leave JJ anything. But yet she wasn't concerned that he's not going to be around for JJ anymore either. That she was more concerned about the money than she was about the shooting. Again, like you said.
And we can't ignore it,
No.
because she killed JJ. She
Yeah.
and Chad Daybell.
Yeah.
And you can assume
Got
Alex
rid of the
Cox
service
is not
dog.
here.
Like that was brought up briefly in
Yeah.
the trial.
And they didn't report the children dead to
Mhm.
Social Security Administration or the new marriage. There's so many red flags, right? And as Judge Mel, our expert, our former judge and former prosecutor, has told us that there's just too many smoking guns.
Yeah.
That's why you wish that Lori takes the stand, when she's not now. Obviously, it's too late. because you wish for a cross exam to get some accountability, just get answers. I mean, you probably get untruthful answers, and Trina calls it. Trina calls it out and says this is a person that is untruthful and doesn't have credibility, because even just look at the footwear angle, and she's telling the jury you cannot believe her what she's going to tell you.
I mean, she couldn't get anybody really to testify on her behalf, right? Remember, she issued several subpoenas, Lori did, and could not get a response, couldn't find half the people. The jury's got to be wondering, like, if this is a quote-unquote family tragedy.
Yeah, if you're innocent. Where's
the family? Where's the rest of the family on your defense to say, yeah, this really was a tragedy and Lori's not this person they're making her out to be? Nobody said that, and nobody wanted to take the stand to say that.
And she talks about this tragedy, yet she didn't show any emotion, and we've already talked about the demeanor right after the shooting. So where's the heartbreak? Where's the sadness, even though you're having marriage problems? And then she brings up in closing arguments that these are three people that she loved, and she doesn't know how to choose, or how do you choose? And in such a situation, the objections are flying in. Trina's ready because she's saying you're not going to bring in hearsay on Tylee and Alex.
You're not here to testify.
Already been ruled as hearsay. They're dead. We can't open this door as to what happened to specifically Tylee and JJ and everything in Idaho. It is such a unique case because of that. It's totally not like Idaho in that way, because you got everything in the kitchen floor, the kitchen sink, I should say, in Idaho. And this, you just have to leave certain avenues closed unless she had opened it up. But it's just so interesting for her to say that she loves Charles and she loves Tylee with what happened to Tylee.
Well, and not once did she present anything, or anybody that took the stand, even from the state's behalf, that showed that she loved Charles. She may have said it, but there were no texts kind of indicating that. All the texts that were presented in court were I don't want to say slanderous, but I mean, obviously they didn't speak. She didn't speak of him in a great light, no pun intended. There was nothing. She didn't present anything that said, no, I really loved Charles. Like, look how happy we are. No family pictures, no, she could have taken the stand and said, no, we had a great, I mean, sure, we had some.
Well, they were trying to work it out.
Yeah, we were trying to work it out, but
But the texts show otherwise with Chad.
Yeah.
So it's like, it may be sounding like we are piling on the defendant right now. But we did not get to see any evidence. I wish we would be able to see something, but she had no real defense at all.
And it's hard to sit here and talk about someone and like we're trying to be as neutral as we can, even though we know a lot more.
You can't ignore that stuff either.
But we also feel like if she really thought that, because again, we weren't there at the scene, right? We know that Alex has
She's the only one alive.
Charles. Right. We there's all sorts of theories, like we don't know that he actually pulled the trigger. He says he did. Police believe him. But the evidence they gathered at the scene doesn't prove it one way or the other. Even Lori pointed that out in her closing arguments, which she could have hammered home in her defense. But when you have someone like this who, I don't know if refuses is the right word, but who chooses not to put up her own defense, it's very hard to be neutral and take someone like her, especially at her word.
Yeah, with her past.
Right. And so, again, is it open to think that the jury might acquit her or be a hung jury? Sure. I'm not part of the 100% guilty crowd because I know how juries work. But if I was a betting man, I'd certainly
takes one.
Yes, right. Only takes one.
And it's her right to not present any evidence.
Absolutely.
And testify. So here we are.
Right.
Here we are in less than 10 days. Closing arguments have wrapped up. Jury is getting a good rest and recharge, and tomorrow morning they'll be back at it. We'll be here streaming and talking about this and just waiting for that official verdict is in, and then we'll bring that to you whenever that comes inside the courtroom, and we'll be on a 5-minute delay. So thanks for watching On the Record. We'll see you tomorrow.